I wanted to introduce him to my family properly before we started making wedding plans. My parents were excited to finally meet the man I had been talking about for so long. On the morning he was supposed to come, he called me before leaving. He sounded happy, but I could tell he was nervous too. He laughed and said he hoped my father would like him. To make him feel more comfortable, his only sister and one of his cousins decided to travel with him. They said they wanted to be there for such an important day. I remember telling him to drive safely and that I'd be waiting for him. Those were the last words I ever said to him. They never made it to my parents' house. On the way, their car was involved in a terrible accident. By the time we reached the hospital, all three of them were gone. One moment, I was excitedly picking out an outfit to wear so my parents could finally meet the man I loved. The next, I was standing beside his coffin, trying to understand how someone so full of life could be gone just like that. I don't remember much about the funeral. People hugged me. They kept telling me to be strong, that God knew best, that time would heal the pain. I nodded because I didn't have the strength to respond, but inside, I felt completely empty. I kept replaying our last phone call over and over in my mind. What if we had chosen a different day? What if we had planned the visit for the evening? What if we had never fixed that date at all? I knew those thoughts wouldn't change anything, but I couldn't stop blaming myself. After the funeral, everyone slowly went back to their normal lives. My parents tried their best to support me. My mother barely left my side. She made sure I ate, even when I wasn't hungry. My father would sit quietly with me in the evenings, never forcing me to talk. Sometimes his silence comforted me more than words ever could. But the nights were the hardest. I'd reach for my phone, hoping to see his name light up the screen, only to remember that he would never call again. His number was still saved in my phone. I couldn't bring myself to delete it. I even listened to his old voice notes just to hear his voice one more time. Sometimes I'd fall asleep holding my phone against my chest. A few weeks passed, and I noticed I wasn't feeling like myself. At first, I thought it was because of the grief. I was always exhausted. Certain smells suddenly made me feel sick. I could barely finish a meal without feeling nauseous. My mother assumed it was stress, and honestly, so did I. Then one morning, I woke up feeling so sick that I could barely get out of bed. That's when my friend gently asked me a question I hadn't even thought about. When was the last time you had your period? I froze. I counted the weeks in my head. I became more nervous with every second. The more I counted, the more nervous I became. The next day, I walked into a pharmacy and bought a pregnancy test. I remember hiding it in my handbag because I didn't want anyone asking questions. When I got home, I locked myself in the bathroom. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped the test. Those few minutes of waiting felt like forever. Then I looked down. 2 clear lines. I just stared at them. I couldn't move. I couldn't even cry at first. I whispered his name over and over, wishing he were there to see it. Out of all the people in the world, he was the one I wanted to tell. Instead, I was standing alone in a bathroom, holding the proof that a part of him was still alive. I didn't tell anyone right away. For almost a week, I kept the pregnancy to myself. Every morning, I'd wake up hoping I'd imagined those 2 lines on the test. But deep down, I knew they were real. I scheduled an appointment at the hospital just to be sure. Part of me was still hoping the test had been wrong. When the doctor smiled and congratulated me, my heart broke all over again. "You are pregnant," she said. "About 7 weeks." I thanked her, but as soon as I got outside, I sat on a bench and cried. People walking past probably thought I was crying because I was happy. This baby should have been the happiest news of our lives. We had talked about having children someday. Whenever we passed families with little kids, he would smile and say, "I hope we have a house full of children one day." I used to laugh and tell him we should start with one. Now I was carrying the child we'd dreamed about, and he would never even know. When I finally told my parents, they were shocked. My mother covered her mouth and immediately started crying. She walked over and hugged me so tightly that neither of us could speak. My father sat quietly for a long time before saying, "This child is innocent. Whatever happens, you're not facing this alone." Those words gave me strength. For the first time since the accident, I felt like maybe everything wasn't completely hopeless. A few days later, I decided it was time to tell his parents. I didn't go because I expected money or support. I went because I believed they deserved to know. After all, this was their son's child. I honestly thought the news might bring them a little comfort after losing him. When I arrived at their house, they welcomed me inside politely, but something felt different. The warmth they used to show me was gone. His mother barely looked at me. His father hardly said a word. After a few minutes, I gathered the courage to tell them. I said, "I found out I'm pregnant. It's his baby." The room became completely silent. His mother stared at me without saying anything. I waited, expecting her to cry, or maybe ask me how far along I was. Instead, she slowly shook her head. Then she said something I'll never forget. She said that if they hadn't been on their way to meet my parents that day, she wouldn't have lost both of her children. I felt like all the air had left the room. At first, I thought she was speaking out of grief. I tried to explain that I missed him too, that I was grieving just as much as they were. But she wouldn't let me finish. She looked straight at me and said, "Ever since you came into his life, all you've brought us is pain." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Then she looked at my stomach and said, "That baby changes nothing." I felt tears running down my face. I quietly said, "This is your son's child, your grandchild." She turned her face away. His father finally spoke. He said, "Our son is gone. We don't want to reopen our wounds. We think it's best if you move on with your life." I sat there in complete disbelief. Move on? How was I supposed to move on when I was carrying the last piece of the man I loved? Before I left, I asked them one last question. When this baby is born and you see your son in their face, will you still pretend they don't belong to your family? Neither of them answered. His father simply stood up, walked to the front door, and opened it and asked me to leave. I walked out of that house feeling as though I'd lost him all over again. Not only had death taken the man I loved, it had also taken the family I thought would one day become my own. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about everything they had said. Their words followed me everywhere. I knew they were grieving, but those words cut so deeply that I started questioning myself. Was it somehow my fault? If I hadn't asked him to come that day, would he still be alive? I asked myself those questions over and over until I couldn't think straight anymore. One evening, my mother found me sitting alone in my room, staring at one of the pictures my fiancé and I had taken together. She sat beside me without saying a word. After a long silence, I finally whispered, "Maybe they're right." She turned to look at me. "What do you mean?" I burst into tears and said, "If I hadn't asked him to come and meet you and Dad, none of this would have happened." My mother immediately held my hands. "No," she said firmly, "don't ever carry that burden." She reminded me that accidents happen every day to people going to work, to school, to weddings, to markets, and even to church. "No one leaves home expecting to die," she said. "Your fiancé wasn't coming because you forced him. He was coming because he loved you. He wanted to meet us and begin the next chapter of your lives together." Those words stayed with me. For the first time since the accident, I stopped blaming myself. The pain was still there, but at least I wasn't carrying guilt along with it. As my pregnancy progressed, I began attending my antenatal appointments. Every visit was bittersweet. When I heard my baby's heartbeat for the first time, I cried so hard that the nurse handed me a box of tissues. She probably assumed they were tears of happiness. In a way they were, but they were also tears of heartbreak. I kept imagining how excited my fiancé would have been to hear that tiny heartbeat. He would have been smiling from ear to ear. He would have called everyone he knew. Instead, I sat alone in the examination room. There was no one beside me to squeeze my hand. No one to argue with me over baby names. No one to joke about whether the baby would inherit my stubbornness or his laugh. Every milestone felt incomplete without him. One afternoon, while I was organizing some of his belongings that his parents had allowed me to keep after the funeral, I found a small notebook tucked inside one of his jackets. I had never seen it before. Inside were random notes, shopping lists, little reminders. And then, near the back, I found a page that made my heart stop. At the top he had written, "Things I want to do before I turn 35. The first few items were ordinary: buy a house, travel with my wife, learn how to swim. Then I saw another line: become the kind of father my children will always be proud of. I couldn't hold back my tears. He had written that months before he died. He had no idea that he was already going to become a father. I hugged that notebook to my chest and cried for what felt like hours. That night, I made a promise to our unborn baby. I promised that even if their father wasn't here, they would grow up knowing exactly who he was. They would know how kind he was, how hardworking he was, how deeply he loved. No one, not even the people who rejected us, would be able to erase his memory. I would make sure of that. As my due date drew closer, I stopped expecting his family to call. Weeks had turned into months, and not once had they called to ask how I was doing or whether the baby was healthy. After everything they had said to me, I convinced myself that they had erased both me and my unborn child from their lives. I accepted that. At least for now, my baby and I were on our own. Then one afternoon, my phone rang. When I looked at the screen, I froze. It was his father's number. For a moment, I just stared at it. My heart started racing, and I wasn't sure whether to answer. The last time I had seen him, he had stood by the front door of their house, making it clear that I was no longer welcome. Curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. The call was brief. He explained that his wife had been struggling ever since the accident. She wasn't sleeping well, barely ate, and spent most of her days looking through old photographs of their son. He said she had been asking about me and wanted to see me before the baby was born. I didn't know what to think. A part of me wanted to refuse immediately. I had spent months trying to recover from the pain they caused me. I wasn't sure I was ready to walk back into the same house where I had been blamed for their son's death and where my unborn child had been rejected before even taking a first breath. But another part of me kept thinking about my baby. If there was even the smallest chance that this child could know their grandparents one day, I felt I owed it to my baby to at least hear them out. The following day, my father drove me there. He told me he would wait outside for as long as I needed. Walking back into that house was one of the hardest things I have ever done. Everything looked exactly the way I remembered it. His photographs still hung on the walls. His shoes were neatly arranged near the entrance. Even his favorite chair was still in the same corner of the living room. It felt as though time had stopped the day he died. When his mother came into the room, I hardly recognized her. She looked exhausted. She had lost weight, and the sadness on her face was impossible to miss. She looked like someone who had been carrying unbearable pain for months. Her eyes immediately settled on my stomach. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The anger I had seen in her during my last visit was gone. Instead, I saw regret. She broke down in tears almost immediately. It took her several minutes before she could compose herself enough to explain why she had asked me to come. She admitted that after losing her son so suddenly, she had been desperate to find someone to blame. Accepting that the accident was simply a tragic event beyond anyone's control had been too painful for her. Directing that pain toward me had felt easier at the time, even though deep inside she knew I wasn't responsible. She told me she had regretted her words almost every single day since I left their house. The closer my due date came, the more she realized that the baby I was carrying wasn't a reminder of the tragedy. The baby was the last living part of her son. That realization had become impossible for her to ignore. Listening to her wasn't easy. The wounds she had caused were still fresh, and no apology could erase those painful months of feeling unwanted and blamed for something that was never my fault. Even so, I could also see a grieving mother standing in front of me. We had both lost the same person. Our grief had simply taken different paths. Before I left, she handed me one of my fiancé's personal belongings that had been returned after the accident. It was a chain he wore almost every day. She told me she wanted our child to have it when they were old enough to understand who their father was. As I held it in my hands, I couldn't stop crying. For the first time since the accident, I felt as though my baby was finally being acknowledged as part of his family. Nothing could bring the man I loved back. Nothing could erase the months of pain, rejection, or heartbreak. But as I walked out of that house, I realized something had changed. For the first time since losing him, I wasn't walking away carrying only grief. I was walking away carrying a small piece of hope. A week after my visit to his parents' house, I went into labor. It happened in the middle of the night. I had been feeling uncomfortable all evening, but I assumed it was just another symptom of being heavily pregnant. When the contractions became stronger and more regular, my mother realized it was time. My parents rushed me to the hospital, and before sunrise, I was in the delivery room. As scared as I was, there was one thing that hurt more than the pain of labor. It was knowing the father of my baby would never meet our child. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined his face. I kept wondering what he would have looked like holding our baby for the first time. After hours of labor, my baby was born. The moment the nurse placed my child in my arms, I completely broke down. For the first time since the accident, my tears weren't only filled with sadness. They were mixed with love, relief, gratitude, and heartbreak all at once. I stared at that tiny face for what felt like forever. It was impossible not to notice the resemblance. The shape of the nose, the chin, even the way the baby frowned while sleeping reminded me so much of him that it almost took my breath away. My parents were crying too. My mother kept saying how beautiful the baby was, while my father stood quietly at the foot of my bed, wiping away tears he was trying so hard to hide. For a few hours, nothing else mattered. The grief, the rejection, and the loneliness all seemed to fade into the background. All I could think about was the little life resting peacefully in my arms. Later that afternoon, something unexpected happened. The hospital receptionist came into my room and told me I had visitors. I wasn't expecting anyone. When the door opened, I was surprised to see his parents standing there. His father was holding a small bouquet of flowers, while his mother carried a neatly wrapped gift bag. They looked nervous, almost as though they weren't sure they had the right to be there. His mother's eyes immediately filled with tears the moment she saw the baby. She stood quietly beside my bed for a long time, simply looking at the child. There was no anger left on her face, only sorrow and love. She reached into the gift bag and carefully placed a small knitted baby blanket beside me. She explained that she had spent weeks making it herself after realizing how badly she had treated me. It had been her way of preparing for the day she hoped she would be allowed to meet her grandchild. Seeing that blanket broke my heart, not because of what it was, but because it reminded me of everything we had all lost. If he had been alive, this moment would have been completely different. We would have been celebrating together instead of trying to heal from unimaginable pain. Before they left, his parents quietly asked if they could remain part of the baby's life. I didn't answer immediately. Forgiveness is not something that happens in a single moment. The pain they caused me hadn't disappeared just because they were sorry. But as I looked down at my child sleeping peacefully in my arms, I realized this decision was no longer only about me. One day, my baby would grow up asking questions about their father. They would want to know where they came from. They would want to know their family. I didn't want my child to inherit bitterness. I wanted them to inherit love. So I decided to give us all a second chance. Not because I had forgotten the past, but because I refused to let the past define my child's future. Looking back now, I still miss my fiancé every single day. There are moments when the grief returns as strongly as it did the day I lost him. But every time I look into my child's eyes, I see a part of him that never truly left. Life didn't give us the future we planned. Instead, it gave me a different purpose, raising the greatest gift he unknowingly left behind.